Hi everyone. I wanted to talk for a moment about the primacy of existence. I've noticed this topic has resurfaced recently, and I think there's some confusion surrounding it. I'm not sure if it's a misrepresentation or just a misunderstanding, but I think it's important that we first clarify, when we talk about the primacy of existence in terms of a presuppositional counter-apologetic, we should differentiate between that and the full objectivist Randian sense of the concept. We're using sort of a short form, small snippet of it, and we probably should have a different term for it, really, because I think it does lead to some confusion. I noticed recently Christopher Matte's discussion with the Bible-thumping wingnut involved the POE, and they had sort of injected God into the equation. They'd said, well, for God to do anything, he would have to first exist. And of course, when you're talking about a purportedly eternal being, first existing is kind of incoherent. And essentially what the primacy of existence, at least in terms of the counter-apologetic, is meant to accomplish is to illuminate an avenue to knowledge that we can have that would not require God. A person might do the thought experiment. If I existed but God did not, could I know that I exist? And so a presuppositional apologist might say something to you like, the proof that God exists is that without him we can't know anything. Now, we'll set aside for a moment that this is not a proof, this is just an assertion. A person confronted with that might ask themselves, well, what could I know without God? Well, I could know that I exist. And that's really all it's meant to accomplish. Now, I noticed recently Matthew 4:19 had said that the primacy of existence is not sufficient to justify your knowledge claim. He stuck an S at the end. And that's not what it's trying to accomplish. It's essentially, as Alex Botten pointed out in a recent clarification, it's meant to stop the presuppositional apologetic in its tracks. Because if you're going to say that we can't know anything without God, well, all I've got to do is illuminate one thing that I can know that would not require God, and the apologetic is stopped in its tracks. Now, Matthew 4:19 had also said that you cannot submit the the primacy of existence without appealing to your reasoning. And if you validate your reasoning using your reasoning, this is a circularity. Now, first off, I think it's a little bit absurd to sort of inject faulty reasoning, valid reasoning, argumentation when it comes to something so fundamental and so basal as our own existence and the knowledge of our existence. I think this is an indication of a desperate apologetic. But again, when we get back to reasoning, maybe I need to revamp my toolbox analogy video. I'm not sure I've got it in me. It would take a lot of time and research. But essentially, they like to reduce reasoning down to this one-dimensional paper tiger. And of course, it's nothing of the sort. There's all kinds of different multidisciplinary, cross-correlating factions going on within our reasoning, and it's just not anything so simple. And of course, there's plenty of reasoning on both sides. You've reasoned that you're going to presuppose that Scripture is accurate. How do you verify it? Using Scripture. So there's lots of circularity involved. If you're going to submit that, if you're going to call your circularity virtuous, it doesn't really add anything. This is just a label. I could slap a label on my circularity too. I might have that label somehow reflect the continuously verifiable and cross-correlating nature of my circularity. And of course, a lot of the claims made by people using their reasoning have falsifiability built in and verifiability so that we can establish the truth value of those claims, and then we can, again, as in the scientific method, develop predictive models to assess that even further to even greater degrees of certainty. And there's a lot of claims made on the presuppositional side of things that are not verifiable and certainly not demonstrable. I think that's an important point to consider. And the ones that are, there are claims that they make that are verifiable. I think this is the reason we're not invited to Bible study, because things like, a fixed earth and et cetera, are easily refuted. Now, there is a claim that they do make that is personally verifiable. So a presuppositional apologist might say something to you like, it's been revealed to us in such a way that we can know it for certain, and you know it too. Well, I can check that, can't I? Just please hold a moment while I check my databanks. Nope, it's not there. Now, I know what's coming next. You're just suppressing the truth and unrighteousness. Well, that's fine, but the burden of proof is on you for that. This is essentially a subroutine, right? It's a subroutine of God is. And under the heading God is, we've got all kinds of attributes and a whole bunch of rules and regulations and a lot of things to say about the way we conduct ourselves here on earth. But I'm not too concerned with all of the subroutines if I can't verify the overall claim. It would be a lot of time well wasted to invest yourself in all the intricacies and all the lifestyle changes necessary to join the Church of Scientology if you couldn't somehow verify the overall claim. Similarly, if I was to suggest a parakeet god on Mars, and he's got all these attributes and a whole bunch of rules and regulations and lots of things to say about the way that we conduct ourselves here on Earth, you're not going to be too concerned about all of these attributes, all of these subroutines, if I can't prove to you or verify or demonstrate to you in some way that the parakeet god on Mars actually exists. So this doesn't do a whole heck of a lot to establish any kind of a truth value when they're simply mere assertions, especially when we can actually falsify, such as in the claim that we know that God exists. Now, I come across some recent communication between Ozzie and Matthew 4:19 on his video on pop philosophy, and I'm paraphrasing a bit here, but he had basically said that the primacy of existence is an irrelevant answer to a poorly expressed apologetic. And essentially he said that, you guys are going to need to take some responsibility for this because you don't really understand how to properly express your apologetic and you're not using it in its purest form. And I'm fine with all of that. I'm not answering the presuppositional apologetic. I'm answering the presuppositional apologetic that's been put forth on YouTube, that particular version. And I think that's important to do. I think it can be a seductive argument for some, and I think it's important to have a rational answer for it on YouTube, available for people when they come across it. Now, Ozzie had also said that the POE is completely question-begging. And I'm not sure, which version he was referring to, if he was referring to the objectivist concept or the short form that we're using to answer the apologist. But I don't really think that it is. I think we've seen this before with Seitan Briggencate when he was addressing cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. And he had said the same thing, it's begging the question, you can't start with I. But I think when it comes to self-referential axiomatic statements, especially existential ones, I think the I is assumed. In fact, it can't not be assumed. To suggest that would be to say, would be similar to saying I don't exist, which is of course a self-refuting statement. It's completely absurd. So I don't think it's question begging. Again, I think when you're talking about self-referential existential questions, the I is assumed. It can't not be assumed. Basically because of the impossibility of the contrary. Now, to borrow from an analogy that I've heard Eric Hovind use, admittedly not something I do often, but I've heard him say that if someone were to approach you saying that words don't exist, that you wouldn't hand them a dictionary. Now, this is cute and all, but we could actually borrow from this and come up with a thought experiment of our own. Imagine if someone were to approach you demanding proof of how you know that words exist. And you start to explain about how we understand the roots of language, the origins of language, and how you learn to use words personally. And he stops you and he says, whoa, hold on there, Tiger. You're begging the question. You can't use words. That this would pale in comparison to the absurdity of the existential questions, right? That much in the same way that you could not question language without affirming language, any statement that I make affirms the I. The I is assumed. But I will close by saying this. I think the next time you're confronted with a presuppositional apologist who asks you what you know and how you know it, I think I would answer with, well, I know that I exist, but tell me, could I be wrong about that? Thanks very much for watching.